Today's May 10th, 2021. I'm BrentNally, and I'm really excited to be here with the founder and CEO of OpenCures, one of Longevity Plan's trusted partners, Kevin Perrott. Kevin, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, thanks a lot, Brent. Thanks for having me on. I've seen your channel. I'm pretty impressed with everything that you've been doing, and I'm glad to be included. So shoot away.
So I'm a huge fan of you and OpenCures, and I became a customer. So that's what this video is going to be all about. My experience through becoming a customer of OpenCures and your partner, Prodrome Sciences. So we'll get into all the details there. But before we jump into that, I want to give a little bit more of a background for you, Kevin, for the audience, because you are just an incredible person in the healthy life extension community. So here we go. I'm on your LinkedIn profile. I encourage people to connect with Kevin on LinkedIn, follow him and follow OpenCures. So in 2006, you got a BS double major in biology and chemistry from University of Alberta. And then you went back and you got your PhD in biomedical engineering in 2018, also from University of Alberta. And then in 2005, you were the COO of the Methuselah Foundation. You were the third employee there. So that shows how far back you go with Aubrey de Grey.
Volunteer, actually.
As a volunteer. Yep. Yeah. Because one thing about Kevin is this guy talks the talk and walks the walk for what he talks, because he is just devoted to doing anything possible to help solve the human aging problem as soon as possible. And Kevin, I think that you understand the challenges, the true challenges that we have to get there. And they are massive and pervasive, and we really need to be working harder. So that's what you're doing. And I think the audience will really understand that the more we get into this video. So you're at COO of the Methuselah Foundation till September 2008. You were then at Lifestar Institute from 2008 to 2011 as COO. You were also the Chief Science Advisor for Entrepreneurs Longevity Club at Buck Institute for Research on Aging from 2015 to 2017. And if anybody here isn't aware, Buck Institute for Research on Aging is in Novato, California, where Kevin is right now. We'll get into this, but Kevin, we're coming from your retail physical location there of OpenCures in downtown Novato, California, which is just north of San Francisco. And the Buck Institute is, I would say, the most prestigious research facility on aging to this day on the planet still. Is that fair, Kevin?
I don't think there's another organization that is as focused on the biological mechanisms of aging or as potentially provided as much data and real world applicability as far as the aging research goes. No, the Buck is ground central station, I guess.
Hey, Central Station. And each one of these stories, as I rapid fire go through, all the organizations that you've been a part of, I want the audience to realize that, Kevin is incredibly experienced and is just very knowledgeable about what the problems and the challenges are. I think he has really good ideas and is on a great path here with OpenCures on how to solve these problems that we'll get into. So September 2017 to February 2018, you were the Chief of Staff at BioAge Labs. Executive Director at the Methuselah Prize at the Methuselah Foundation from 2003 to 2018, Director of Health Extension Foundation, 2016 to present. And, a little bit more of your background, the Riverside Honda and Skidoo sales, you can get into that if you want with your family business.
A different world, yeah.
Global Healthy Policy Institute, November 2015 till present. Co-founder and treasurer of the SENS Research Foundation with Aubrey de Grey way back in 2009. I mean, most people in healthy life extension know who SENS are at this point. So that's how long you've been involved. And Aubrey, I know is
forever. I've been involved forever. I'm getting old. I'm getting old doing this.
Co-founder and advisor of Ocean Biotechnologies, 2012 to present. We actually have a story coming out about them tomorrow in Lifespan News. Tomorrow's
great company.
Yeah. And this video probably won't even be on by the time I say tomorrow. So May 11th, 2021 episode of Lifespan News. And then You're the founder and CEO of OpenCures 2018 to present. So that was exhaustive, but Kevin, thank you so much for everything that you've been doing in this community for literally decades. And I think more people should know about you and OpenCures and all the organizations I just mentioned that you've been involved with. So Kevin, any way that you want to kind of explain your background, your story, how you got involved with longevity would be fantastic. The floor is yours.
I've always considered myself a sane person. Life extension, aging, all of these topics about living healthier longer have always been something that has attracted me, especially the scientific aspects of it. I unfortunately always thought that it would be done, that by the time I needed any kinds of life extending technologies, that they would be there and available. And I had faith in science. I had faith in the pace of science. I had faith in the survival instinct, the strength of the survival instinct, that when it could happen, it would happen, simply because of the dramatic need. But that isn't exactly what happened. So over time, I just let things go, and I didn't bother focusing on life extension for most of my life. And I worked at our family business. So we're come from the largest motorcycle and snowmobile business in Canada. So I had my hands full, and I ran the company, and I became very experienced in pretty much all aspects of business management. But my main focus for the company over the years, and one of the reasons why we've been so successful, is I brought in computers, I brought in the servers, I brought in the accounting systems, I brought in the ability to do marketing and to do evidence-based sort of business management, which was not something that was available before. And in that process, I became understanding of just how important data is to managing anything. And if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. It was basically a mantra that we had. Just making guesses and that sort of thing was not good enough. You needed to measure it. So when I got thyroid cancer, and I needed to get my thyroid removed, and I went through the whole process of surgery and a whole massive problem with some side effects from the surgery, not even from the cancer, I realized how fragile my health was, and I realized how, sorry to say, how incompetent the medical system was. And that really frightened me for the future. And I decided to turn my back on a very successful company in a very successful position and pretty much a guaranteed future of wealth and all the rest of it for the more nebulous and ephemeral idea of working on life extension. And that's when I came into contact. I started looking around. It was about early 2000s, late 1990s. And I was looking at what was online that would be the best way forward for fighting cancer and other age-related conditions, because I totally realized that cancer was just one age-related condition, and we needed to be prepared for pretty much anything. The DNA genome, human genome, was just being solved. And I thought, holy moly, I'm a programmer. The data's incredible. What will we be able to do about aging with this consensus human genome in our hands? And I started looking around at what the best anti-aging sort of science there was. And I came across a group called the Immortality Institute, and I was remarkably surprised to find out that although they talked about immortality, it was science-based, it was evidence-based. It was, what can we practically do to ensure that we never have to watch our identities dissolve into either an age-related chronic disorder or death in general. And I thought, fascinating. And I found a group of like-minded individuals that eventually became the Methuselah Foundation, because we were waiting, and guess who came along but Aubrey de Grey. Aubrey de Grey was the first rational person to put forward a structure that would make aging an approachable challenge. He took aging as this sort of random, process that you couldn't do anything about, and he cut it up into manageable pieces and said if we could cure these or fix these various things, we would have a handle on aging. Now, of course, it's a lot more complicated than that, but just to have an intellectual framework to talk about aging. And it occurred to me, as a cancer survivor at that point, that if there was a small non-zero probability, no matter how small, if there was a non-zero probability of being able to address all age-related diseases or all causes of aging at once, so that we can actually avoid all the things that we know kill us now, that would be an amazing thing. And really, it gets you more time. So really, the only thing that we should be considering doing, because we're all running out of time, is finding ways to make more time. And so I helped co-found, or I became a director of the Methuselah Foundation at the time, and I became the executive director of the Methuselah Mouse Prize. And it just went from opportunity to opportunity to collaboration to collaboration. And we just learned in the process not only a tremendous amount about the science, but we also learned a tremendous amount about the barriers preventing science from being actualized into interventions. And as a cancer survivor, again, I come at everything, all of these questions, I come at with, how do we minimize time to the development of an intervention, of a treatment or therapy? Because if you're sick, which we will all eventually be someday, if we're unlucky, we are going to need this. So really, all of us are running out of time. And we don't want to be on our deathbed or on our sick in a hospital bed wishing we would have spent more time doing something to avoid that situation. So for me, it's everything out on the table. It's about minimizing time to the development of interventions. Everything that I've done, all that I've ever produced, any organization I've ever been involved with, it's all been about avoiding that moment of regret at the end of the day, that where we've left something on the table or we've focused on the wrong things and we miss our opportunity to get that therapy that we're going to, and everybody we love or care about is actually going to need. So I've had a long history. There's an awful lot of things that I've done, but it just serves to show you how little progress we have made in the past 15 years since almost 20 years since I first started on this. And I have found that most of the barriers to progress are not technical. They are the inability of people to focus on the real problem, which is time. Minimizing time. We can be distracted by a million other things, other motivations and other incentives. But when it comes right down to it, you don't want to be the person who has $1 billion in your bank and no cure for your particular life-threatening condition. So we really focusing all of our resources together, building collaborations. This is really where my focus is now.
That's fantastic. And I completely agree. Kevin, you and I agree on so many things. My quick story, which I think a lot of my YouTube audience knows, is that I got really interested in longevity around 2006 when I read the book, The Singularity is Near. Then I started watching this guy, Aubrey Gray, TED Talks on YouTube in the early days of YouTube, 2007, 8, 9 or so. And I was just been following the science, reading a lot of books, watching YouTube videos of interviews, reading, PubMed, a lot of stuff online, active on Facebook and things and other things like that, going to conferences when it comes to longevity, until February of 2018, when I finally, quit my job at LinkedIn, Microsoft. And my wife and I traveled the world for 2018 because we said, hey, we wanted to do this before we had a kid and the future is not promised. Little did we know a pandemic would make us kind of prophetic. COVID-19, but we wanted to do that first before we had a kid. And we got pregnant in February of 2019 and my child was born in November of 2019. But I've been focusing full-time 100% on solving the human aging problem for over 2 years now. And the reason I'm all in at age 36 chronologically right now, and I've been all in for a couple of years, is because I recognize the same thing that Kevin recognized, which is that when you're young, whether that's teenager, 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s, I see a huge cognitive bias of many people in the healthy life extension community, longevity community, biorejuvenation, anti-aging, whatever you want to call it, of people just seeming to think what I thought in my 20s of like, oh yeah, this stuff is just going to happen and I don't have to do anything. I can kick my feet up and go to the beach. I can tell you, and Kevin has just, if you've been listening to his story, listen to Kevin. He's been involved in every single major institution, pretty much involved in longevity of the big players. And it's not just going to happen. We have to work to make it happen.
We have to work at it. It's an optimistic bias. It's a bias for optimism. Most people think that they're going to be the lucky one. You know, nobody wants to think that they're going to be the loser, that they're the one who's going to draw the short straw. And it's only those people, you know, and they call it an average lifespan for a reason. It's because 50% of the people don't actually make it there. And many of the people who die before average lifespan never thought in a million years that they would be one of the ones to not make it past that. And most people often dream, fantasize, and really think that they're going to be the ones to die in their sleep with a smile on their face. And a lot of people just don't even think about it at all, because we put all of these very important, often short-term, you know, things in front of that. Who wants to think about their mortality? Who wants to think about the fact that they're going to be old and falling apart? And, you know,
from my experience, Kevin, I think that's the majority of the people that really don't think about it. That's why our company is called Longevity Plan, and we've developed this facial aging tool to show you what you might look like.
What a shocker, eh?
And we found from this tool, I wasn't expecting it to have this big of an impact, but it's really scaring people, and it's getting them to think more seriously about themselves aging and taking control of their health. So that's why we developed that tool.
And it's the monkey brain. It's the monkey brain. And it's actually just having a brain that interprets its environment through visual cues. Our brain is very much a slave of our eyes. And if we want to see something, if we see something, we'll often believe it, even if it's an illusion. So that's why when you do have these kind of transformations, these pictures, and I urge people to go to your website and, you know, play around with the tool and just take a look. There's something that happens to a person's brain when they see their own face morph into some sort of decrepit old person, that because they don't want to think. They've been spending a lot of time not thinking about getting old. And there it is, unavoidable. It's like you want to treat yourself to a horror story. And there it is. There's the horror story. There's the outcome. This is you as an older individual. And it's just, it's definitely eye-opening for people cognitively to be faced with that picture. So that's a sneaky way of getting people to get past beyond this bias against thinking about their aging and age-related process and making it real for them. So congratulations.
Well, we got to break through the biases, and we're in early beta with this tool. Hopefully we'll improve upon it. Like, it doesn't necessarily make your hair gray and things like that. It's not perfect, but it's serving.
It's the wrinkles. The wrinkles and the facial wrinkles are my God. Right. It's happening. This is real time. This is real time. I didn't look like this 20 years ago. You know, When I first started this, I mean, I can go back into my Facebook and I can show you pictures of a much younger person. So it's much worse when it's happening in real time.
Right.
I don't need to go to your website to be horrified at what I look like when I'm an older person, because it's very clear what's happening. Yeah. Anyhow, younger people, you're right. The bias of young people is this helps bring people who don't think about it. It brings them to that point. Yeah.
Definitely. So Kevin, maybe at another time we can go deeper into, you know, an interview with you, but in interest of not making this video like insanely long, like 4 hours, yeah. 4 hours long, I'm going to share with the audience with this video. On April 1st, we had a phlebotomist come out to my home, and it was a great experience that, you know, as I became an OpenCures customer, and we'll cut to that video here in just a few moments. It's about 9 minutes, and you'll see how easy the process was. Kevin, if you can just quickly give, you know, a quick synopsis of OpenCures, and then maybe even share with the audience, you know, my blood is biobanked, so you can share about other things that we could potentially do with the blood sample that you took. And then after you see the experience of me getting the blood drawn from the phlebotomist, then I got a few weeks later the results of my lipidomics through OpenCures partner Prodrome Sciences. And then what you'll see is an actual analysis where we screen share my results of my lipidomics with the founder and president of Prodrome Sciences, Dayan, going through everything. So that's kind of what's coming up in this video. Kevin, kicking it to you.
OpenCures is essentially made for biohackers. It's made for people who want to measure their health at the highest resolution scientifically possible. While I was going through my PhD as a cancer survivor, and I'm using all of these tools to measure the biosamples of flies, worms, mice, or whatever, and I'm thinking, why can I take my own blood sample and run it through these machines and get back these thousands of data points to kind of give me a really good overview of where my biology is? And I found out that was almost impossible because the equipment is owned by the institutions. There's lots of regulatory and policy kind of things which prevent scientists from really thinking about using the tools on themselves. And so in order for me to take a look at my own biology, I actually had to open OpenCures. And it's called the Self-Directed Research Center. And it allows individuals the ability to provide a biospecimen, usually it's a blood sample, and take that blood specimen. And if they've already identified assays or types of scientific things that they want to do with their blood, and different biomarkers they want to look at, we can identify the best vendor for that. We can send a sample off to them. And we also, as you said, we biobank the remainder. So we put a bit of you on ice so that in the future, you can compare who you are in the future to who you are today. So you start to get this timeline and you can start to monitor things for changes. So that was OpenCures. And for people like you or me, we're interested in prevention more than we are in curing a current pathology. And that's what Prodrome Sciences actually focuses on. That's what a prodrome is a pre-existing sort of biochemical pattern. It's like rust. Rust starts to occur in a person's vehicle many, many years almost before you start to see the paint bubbling. So we want to start to look at what is going on under the hood. And the best way to do that is with mass spectrometry, which has the capacity to measure hundreds, thousands, potentially millions of biomarkers all at the same time. And the best mass spectrometry assays that can produce the largest amount of data, relevant data, is we start off with metabolomics, and the lipidomics is what you referred to. So we measure with the Prodrome assay 300 different biomarkers which are associated with cell membrane integrity. And some of these biomarkers, these phospholipids and other lipids, are incredibly important. And if you're deficient in any of them, you're subject to different disorders, health, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, a whole bunch of things. So we do allow people, we give them this capacity to access these technologies, acting as a self-directed researcher, treating their body as their own experiment. And that allows us to provide them with this high definition insight into their health.
Awesome. And so is there anything else that you wanted to state right now that the audience will need to know to kind of set up the rest of the video that you can think of?
It's a long, complicated story, but yeah. So I think basically if somebody's curious about their health and they want to access scientific tools that they wouldn't not otherwise be able to access, they can certainly get in touch with me. And we can discuss how we can make that happen. And also they can currently just go to the website order up some of the tests that we have available through the longevity community. And then we can work on, getting back the results and interpreting them and giving them proper actions and things that they need to do to make use of the data. Short of that, I don't really have much more to add.
Well, like all my videos on my BrentNally channel, I think my regular viewers know I make extensive notes with timestamps and show notes in the description below. So, of course, we'll have links to Kevin's, all social media, his Facebook, LinkedIn, connect with them, but also OpenCures. It's OpenCures.org, and follow them on social media.
So the ultimate goal of OpenCures is to help people measure their health, produce data that they can use. But the ultimate goal is that we together as individuals pool our data together. We own our data and we decide if we want to share it and how we want to pool it and how we want to aggregate it and what happens to that data and our biospecimens afterwards. So it is sort of like a citizen science approach of giving normal consumers, normal people, the power and the tools that they need to manage their own biospecimens and their own health data, and even potentially get personal gain from it. So it's actually two layers of things. One, the individual gains immediate benefit from understanding more about their health and being able to take actions if their health biomarkers aren't correct. But at the end of the day, in order to minimize time to the development of therapies, we can together create a pool of data which will be able to drive the science forward, and we will have influence on that data together. It's much more of a cooperative. Definitely, we're looking at open source opportunities, but of course, we also need to be sustainable. So we're also looking at for-profit opportunities as well. But the point is we're doing this together. So if you're a customer of OpenCures, you are going to have a say in what happens to your data, and you're going to have a say in what happens to your biospecimens. And together, we will focus the value of our aggregate data and our aggregate biospecimen bank on the problems that we want to see solved. So come on over.
Beautiful. Yeah, definitely check out OpenCures.org. Again, link in the description below. Now we're going to cut to the April 1st, 2021 is, I believe, the date when the phlebotomist came to my home. So you guys can see that process of the blood draw and see how easy it is. Today's April 1st, 2021. I'm BrentNally, and this is Nally, my 16-month young little baby making his first appearance on my YouTube channel. And I'm here with Brooke Fraser, who's a phlebotomist with My On Site, right?
Yep.
And Brooke just arrived here, and she is going to do a blood draw. And she's got a centrifuge. Lauren, you want to put Lauren, my wife, is the camera woman here. So she's going to take my blood, spin it up in the centrifuge. She brought dry ice right here, which is kind of shrapneled up is the way that Kevin Perrott, CEO of OpenCures, wants it. So then we're going to get my blood analyzed through OpenCures, and Alton is done. So Brooke just said I have good veins. That's what everybody always tells me whenever I get blood drawn or anything.
That's a plus.
Yeah. No. And Alton's excited.
You don't pass out or nothing, right?
No, I've never. Well, I never have.
Okay.
It's always the first time for everything, but I'm feeling pretty good. Oh, another important thing, you're supposed to be fasted at least 10 hours is what Kevin told me. And I'm currently at, I think, 16 hours fasted right now.
16?
Yeah.
Starving?
Oh, I normally fast about 18 hours every day. So,
wow.
Yeah, I'm a weirdo. Now, there's longevity benefits for it, according to my personal research. So I'm good to go.
Is there any way you can kind of turn?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, here's the blood draw.
There it goes. Getting some blood. There, now it's flowing.
You don't need 4 of them. There we go.
All right, so that's all 4 of them.
Yep.
And Brooke is really good at her job.
Did that hurt?
No, it was simple.
Is it still bleeding? Barely.
Just barely, yeah.
I got a Band-Aid for you right
Okay,
now.
great, thanks. So then these, perfect, thank you.
Did you bring him a lollipop?
No, I didn't.
Oh,
I wanted my lollipop.
Okay, so these, we're gonna invert them 5 to 6 times or 4 to 6 times.
Okay.
Without like, you don't want to shake them because it'll clot them faster.
Okay.
And then we're gonna put them on ice right here.
Okay, they're going on the dry ice that Brooke brought.
Regular ice or dry ice?
This is regular ice.
Oh, okay. I couldn't see from my angle. I didn't even know.
That's just for until we can get everything ready to spin, because you want them cold as they can be. The whole idea with putting them on the ice is to slow down the process of like the
Get the
Like a coagulation or something, or
So then Brooke brought this centrifuge here.
Yeah, this you have to kind of tricky. It has to be balanced, so if you put one in one, you could put one here, you know, like you don't want to put them all on the same side.
Right.
Because it'll go crooked and then yeah.
Okay.
And then you'll get an uneven spin. And we're gonna turn it to 1,000 and run it for 15 minutes.
Okay. Turn it to 1,000, you said?
Yep.
that RPM.
Yeah.
And it runs for 15 minutes.
Yep.
Now, what is the point of this centrifuge? Why are we doing this, like, for OpenCures?
I'm not exactly sure what test you're doing,
Right.
but we're spinning it to separate the blood and the serum to take, so it'll have your red blood cells and then it'll have the white blood cells separated.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's to separate the white and the red blood cells, right?
Yep, and it this particular test, I believe, is so that it's not going to the blood's not going to clot. It's just different tests. Like if you're doing like a full physical, a lot of times they do these tests, and it tests the protein and everything that's in your blood to tell pretty much with that one test they could tell how healthy you are or how healthy you're not.
Right. Hopefully I'm healthy. So that's what we're going to find out. The second part of this video is I'm going to be interviewing Kevin Perrott, who's the CEO and founder of OpenCures. And depending on the lag time here, it's going to be anywhere from like 10 days to 3 weeks is what Kevin just told me on the phone of when I'll actually get my results. So the idea is I'll interview Kevin on Zoom and we'll go through, do a screen share and go through all of the results. And Kevin will walk through all the details of that so that people can understand the benefits of doing what I'm doing and getting this blood test through OpenCures. All right, so the centrifuge just stopped. And
That's all four.
we just took all 4 of them out. Okay, so Brooke, they're going on the normal ice right now, and then what's the next step after this?
Then, well, for 5 minutes they got to chill right here. Then I'm going to put them into here, and these have been chilling right here to get cold too.
Okay.
This is where I'm going to take the pipette and take the top serum off and put it in here. And then after that, we're going to take just 1 milligram, I believe, of the second, which is the white blood cells.
And then, Lauren, all the steps for this are right here. So OpenCures gives you this paperwork. So if you just want to look at that, that just describes everything that we're doing, basically. Okay, so Brooke, can you explain what's going on at this point?
Yep, this is, I'm separating this, and you have to be really careful because we don't want to get any of the, see how there's like the 3 layers and there's blood right here? We don't want to get any of that into this vial. So it's got to be as clear as we can get it.
Okay, it's just the plasma, in other words.
Yeah, but you don't want to get nothing else, so we're just gonna, like as little as we can without letting the red into the clear.
Okay, so Brooke is getting my plasma again separated. So the centrifuge, which is running, you can hear it right now, is getting some plasma. Or is separating the blood and the plasma. And then now she's getting the plasma out.
Sorry, that's my phone.
That's all right.
All right, so now we're going to do this final step here. So Brooke got it in here. The box, here we'll show it real quick. So it's in there on the dry ice, and be careful with this dry ice. It's really cold, and then it's got to be down so that the lid can go on top. So now we'll put on the lid, make sure it closes properly, and then final, we put the styrofoam there in the box.
Cool beans.
So there it was. You saw me getting my blood drawn on April 1st, 2021. Again, today is May 10th, 2021 that we're recording here. And now we're going to go back in time again to see last week when Dayan, the founder and CEO of Prodrome Sciences, is going over my report of my lipidomics from that blood draw that you just saw. Kevin, anything else you wanted to say right now to set that up?
I'm surprised you didn't cry.
It wasn't that bad. And I've been told I have really good veins. I think my wife zoomed in on it. So you guys just saw that. So from the April 1st, 2021 blood draw that I had done, that is now biobanked with OpenCures. So there's many other types of tests that I can have done with that biobank that I have, like my metabolomics, my proteomics, my phenoage, Morgan Levine's DNA methylation clock, my GrimAge through Dr. Steve Horvath's clock. There's a transcriptome clock that seems to be very accurate for testing biological age that we reported on Lifespan News. That was March 16th, 2021 episode on our Life Extend Show channel. And then many other tests that, we could potentially come up with in the future that I haven't thought of. We should be able to test using this that's indefinitely biobanked through OpenCures. Kevin, kicking it to you. Is everything I said there correct? And do you want to expand upon that?
It's absolutely correct. And I started out with OpenCures being much more focused on the data. It's like, what is the data, the metabolomics? We need to collect this data and bring it together and start using it to develop interventions. And then we were going to biobank people's biosamples, but then it hit me. The biosample is the ground truth. It is the ground truth of everything. It is when we're measuring the metabolomics of everything, it's just measuring one thin slice of information that's available from the biological sample. And what we would love to be able to do is be able to compare who we are today against who we were a year ago, and then a year be able to compare who we are a year from now. And so we absolutely need to have these biosamples banked in order to do that. But as new technologies also get developed that can measure more and more biomarkers with less and less sample. So critical to the GrimAge and these other types of assays that are available is, what is the tissue that they need? Do they need can you do it with a blood sample? How is the blood collected? Is it going to be cheap enough? And there's a whole bunch of other different considerations that a person needs to have. But we definitely, if you don't have the biosamples banked, you can't. You don't have an opportunity to do that. So I'm actually, I wonder why the current medical establishment and why the doctors are not actually biobanking our samples from different periods in our lives, so that we would have this opportunity to do this. So we've got to do this ourselves. And we should all have a biobank for ourselves with our own samples, and we can use that. I just wish I had biobanked more. And I think some of the tests that we need are going to require larger amounts of sample. And so we have to be very judicious in how we manage our inventory, because this stuff is very, very valuable. There is no way that Brent is going to be able to go back in time to April 1st and draw blood from Brent again, if you had that question. So I'm almost thinking, we almost should be biobanking like 50 mils, or like how much should we be biobanking? So when you're thinking about OpenCures or tests or biobanking, this is what people are now going to have as an option. And they're going to be able to think about the kinds of tests that they are going to want.
That's great. And so one thing that I believe we mentioned is that you're currently sitting there in the retail office of OpenCures, which is in downtown Novato, California, just north of San Francisco. Where is my blood actually being biobanked physically?
Right now, your samples are actually biobanked here in a liquid nitrogen tank at minus 180 degrees Celsius. A large portion of the previous samples, I have a collaboration with the Buck Institute, and so that is where the sort of the permanent storage is being held. But because you're so recent, I acquire and batch the samples here. But yeah, so right now so we're working in the software platform. The OpenCures software platform will give OpenCures clients the ability to monitor, how many vials they have, how much sample they have. They'll even hopefully be able to transfer and be able to say, I want my vial of blood to go to this particular institution. If you want to help somebody with research, it's so much more empowering when you have control over these kinds of samples rather than just leaving it to an academic institution. You never see this stuff. Nobody even knows that this is even a possibility. So being the first person on the planet to allow a consumer to biobank their plasma, I mean, come on. That is just crazy that this hasn't already been available.
Well, now, a couple of years ago in 2019, my wife and I, and this is on my YouTube channel, I'll put a link or a card above, we became Forever Labs customers. So we have our bone marrow stored there through Forever Labs. And I think they told us that even though they're headquartered in Michigan, they outsourced the actual cryopreservation process to a company in Indiana. So I believe our blood is there, but they're not doing anything with it. And I don't think there's any test that can be done with it. So that's a key differentiator between OpenCures.
There are, but they're very specific tests that you would want to have. My own bone marrow is being banked at Forever Labs as well. And I did it mainly because I know that someday they'll be able to take the bone marrow mesenchymal stem cells that were 53 at the time, which are no spring chickens as far as stem cells go. So it's hard to say how valuable they are in terms of a therapeutic agent, but we can currently potentially reverse. There are companies that are looking at reversing sort of the aging of the stem cells so that they can become a better therapeutic. So really, Forever Labs is one of the first consumer biobanking companies that it sort of gave me the idea, but the question is its cells are just something that you put aside that you may need for the future. Whereas what we're doing is we are recording who you are, your internal biochemistry, a snapshot it's like a smog check almost for your body, is that you can take a snapshot, a high resolution snapshot of how everything is functioning. It's not just biobanking cells.
And then we'll be able to compare it to future blood samples that you bank is the idea, so that we can better understand what slows, stops, and potentially reverses aging, and what might be accelerating aging based off certain therapies and lifestyle things that you're doing. So that's the idea. That's the huge idea, to be running this never-ending, large clinical trial that's as open source as possible. The individual gets to control what kind of data that they want to share. And that's, the partnership. This mission's so vast that my, company that I'm the co-founder and CEO of, Longevity Plan, we have a strong partnership with OpenCures because right now this problem is so pervasive that we're working.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And it's huge. But aging has obviously been the winner ever since, millennia life began. It is a formidable adversary. And if any single entity, company, brain thinks that they're going to get anything more than a scratch on aging surface, it is, if we really do think it's a non-zero probability of doing something about the aging process, it will only happen if we work together. And that is 20 years of doing this with nonprofits, for-profits, financial people, non-financial people, all across the board. This is a massive, massive undertaking, and we should all be no holds barred, balls out, fucking doing this.
Yep. Collaboration and cooperation is the key. Final thing, Kevin, just again, you're in your retail office there. You have a PCR test there. You mentioned that you have, my blood sample there on liquid nitrogen until it goes to the Buck Institute, I think, for longer term storage. What other kind of gadgets and, fun equipment do you have there in that lab?
Well, I've got that. You've probably heard of the age meter, which was developed. So I've got the age meters available, and we've had a number of people using that. We've got COVID. We're doing COVID testing. We've got the normal, blood pressure meter, weigh scales, and things like that. I don't really have a ton of more exciting things. The focus has been on being able to to allow somebody to take blood out of their veins and do something with that blood. And I keep saying, if I wanted to actually just have a vial of my blood to drink every morning, and I couldn't find somebody to do that for me. We are not allowed to retrieve blood, our own bodily fluid, out of our veins. We can obviously obtain as much urine as we possibly could, be worried about.
And saliva,
and saliva and whatever else comes out of our bodies. But blood is not something that is easily obtainable. And it is the thing that is the most valuable when you're looking at what's going on under the hood. Your blood touches every part of your tissue, every nook and cranny gets exposed to your circulatory system. So in essence, your blood is the best recording of what is happening in the system. And we are prevented from actually getting that blood without permission. And I don't need permission. I really don't want to have to ask somebody for that permission.
Yeah, it's your right to have that access, and OpenCures is a phenomenal company that's helping you have more of your human rights come to fruition. So we really appreciate the work that you're doing, Kevin. And I'll just say, finally, a lot of people say that the skin is the largest organ in the body. The more that I've kind of learned, I seem to believe that the blood is actually the largest organ in the body. I give the little, if you're not watching, the little rabbit ear quotes there, because I understand that the blood isn't considered an organ, but the more that I learn about it, the more that I think that we should maybe reconsider that. So what are your thoughts?
Blood may not be considered an organ, but it is certainly considered a tissue. And if something is a tissue, it should also be considered an organ. Just because it is fluid and it moves around and it's dynamic, it is still contained within the cardiovascular system. And it's definitely, it's a very complicated. I think we're going to find an awful lot more about blood and how much more like an organ it is than just sort of this fluid which floats around and brings stuff to different parts of our body. It has its own computational aspects. It has its own dynamics. Fluid dynamics are very important. And it changes consistency as necessary. So it can either be thicker, more viscous or not. It really responds to change just like any other organ does. And so totally, it's one of the easiest, most collectible things if we can find people to actually pull it out of our bodies for us.
Definitely.
My name is Dr. Dayan Goodenowe. My background is actually in psychiatric medicine. My initial training is in synthetic organic chemistry. My training is really in biochemical mechanisms of disease. Done a lot of work in complex biochemistry, invented mass spectrometry technology to measure thousands and thousands of molecules. Focused many part of my life was, my career was focused on diagnosing disease, identifying biochemical mechanisms of disease so that we can predict disease, early screening, and also for therapeutic intervention in disease. And what I focus now on is more longevity and immortality type work of how we can extrapolate and not keep on chasing our tail. We're saying, oh, here's a disease, let's fix a disease, and then wait for the next disease to come along and then fix it. Diseases are useful. They're actually pressure testing, and they reveal weaknesses in our biochemistry that are likely to occur. And
can you, I'm sorry to interrupt, can you define prodrome?
So prodrome is basically that which comes before, is the technical term of it. So it's being able to predict or the precursor to a future action. And in the biochemical world, the concept of a negative prodrome, so for instance, type 2 diabetes would be a prodrome to cardiovascular disease, potential liver failure, diabetic neuropathies. Would insulin resistance then be considered a prodrome for type 2 diabetes? Yes, absolutely. And then likewise, intermittent fasting, resisting, those are prodromes to low fasting triglycerides, higher HDL, better longevity, better cognition, better blah, blah, blah. So whatever is predictive of a future action or future event is a prodrome. And so what we've done is we've taken the disease prodromes, the biochemical changes that occur before disease happens, and we've actually extrapolating backwards and say, okay, can we move towards an enhanced function? Rather than waiting for disease and fixing the disease, we can create biochemical reserves in advance of disease. So it's even a higher level of preventing a particular disease outcome. And
would you say that biochemical reserve would be similar to homeostatic capacity, which is something that, the longevity community, some of the more wealthy people in the longevity community are promoting? June Yoon is one of the guys. But homeostatic capacity is based on biochemical reserve, I would imagine.
Well, it's basically simple stuff. It's like for your omega-3s and your fasting to fed state switching. Yeah, so if you have sufficient omega-3s, if you have sufficient plasmalogens, for instance, okay, there's certain diseases that you're just not going to get. So you have reserve capacity for those things. And so you have a room to absorb insults when they occur, because you're going to get random insults in your life. You're going to get random states of inflammation. You're going to get random illnesses. When we're young, we have reserve capacity, and so we can absorb those insults. Even though those insults are still negative, we have the reserve both physically and functionally to absorb those during that temporary period of time, and it rebounds back. So that's what reserve capacity is. So for instance, sufficient choline levels for you, right? You have good choline levels. So that's a reserve capacity preventing liver disease and pancreatic cancer. It just doesn't occur in people with that situation.
I'll send you Brent's sample again in the next batch under a different number, and we'll see if you come up with the same numbers.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to move it this way so it's not always my side of my head.
Sure. It's centered for us anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So resume share. Excellent. Okay. We can see everything here.
Yep.
And let me zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
So this profile for you, Brent, is typically, so the ProdromeScan report is designed with 14 sections, 2 pages. And the first page deals primarily with the relative quantities of specific molecules or biomarkers in your blood. So we're looking for relative high levels versus low levels and the relative ratios within those molecules. The second page deals more with systems and how the systems are working. And so the concept about biosystem reserve capacity falls both individual molecule category as well as having systems reserve capacity. So the first section, typically I deal with all 4 sections 1 through 4 simultaneously. And these are the phospholipids of the body. And phospholipids are like a soap. They have a polar head group, 2 nonpolar fatty acid tails, and they organize into what's called a phospholipid bilayer. And phospholipids are the building material that your body uses to make walls. And your body is essentially a compilation of 1 trillion or more physical cells. And all these cells are 3-dimensionally defined by their outer membrane. And that outer membrane is made by phospholipids. And within each cell, there's subcompartmentalizations. So your mitochondria will be separated from the peroxisome, from the nucleus, from other compartments. And it's this compartmentalization that allows the body to perform different functions in different cells of the body. So your heart cells do different things than your lung cells and your brain cells because they can be compartmentalized. And then within each cell, we can compartmentalize functions as well, because that allows us to put dangerous activities like our mitochondrial function focus in the mitochondria, whereas protein synthesis is happening in ribosomes. And so that's what we do, because your body is physically, every single cell has little bonfires burning in it at each time. And that little bonfire is a mitochondria. We can't have it escaping into everything. And so these membranes, when we talk about proteins, physical infrastructure of your body is fundamentally a membrane-based infrastructure. Your proteins are embedded into these membranes, just like your windows are embedded into your walls, and they allow things to pass in and out. And as the composition of your walls change, the ability for your windows to open and close properly are modified. And that's one of the major issues with age. And then we're always chasing our tail as to the cascading process of, you modify, it's like the butterfly effect. I've got an internet connection here, where you modify the membrane, which then modifies a protein, which then modifies something else later down the cascade chain. So long story short is the two main components are these ethanolamines and these cholines. That makes about 75 to 80% of your membranes. And then the rest are serines and inositols and, a bunch of other things. But the bulk one, so where these go, the rest basically follow. So they're kind of the core to look at. And within each of these phospholipids, there's basically two types, brother and a sister. There's the phosphatidyl, which is 1A, and 1B is the plasmalogens. Phosphatidyl's are your classic biochemistry 101 phospholipid that you get completely from your diet. Plasmalogens are molecules your body must make. And we don't get virtually any of them from our diet because they're designed in such a way that they're very sensitive to acid degradation. So they're designed to be consumed to protect other parts of your body.
I think, just to clarify, Dan, I think you can say that we do get a lot of plasmalogen in our diet. It just gets destroyed by our digestion.
Correct. Yeah. Because, heart muscles, like lung tissue and muscles will have plasmalogens in them. High concentrations, we're talking 20% of your entire brain, high levels of your heart, lungs, kidney, the retina of your eye. So the sinus rhythms of your heart depend upon functioning plasmalogen levels. So they're very important. And then the subsets of these phospholipids, the long chain omega-3, which is DHA, like people call it fish oil, but your body makes it. So we're fish oil making mammals, if you will. So these fatty acids are polyunsaturated long chain fatty acids, and they're long and kinky. And what they do is they disrupt the membrane structure and gives them fluidity. And that's the difference between being a plant and an animal. Animal membranes are fluid, plant membranes are very stiff and rigid.
And just for clarification again, sorry to interrupt, but the 16-0 is the length of, it's a glycerol backbone we're talking about with three positions.
Right.
Two of the
So this
positions
is the anchor.
Yeah.
95% of all phospholipids, the SN1 position is one of three fatty acids. It's an anchor. It's either 16-0, which is palmitic, 18-0, which is stearic, or 18-1, which is oleic. It's the SN2 position that's biologically active, and it's what causes the inflammation cascades and also the resolving cascades. So if it's arachidonic acid, you get inflammation. If it is DHA, you get anti-inflammatory and resolving cascades.
And the SN3 position is occupied by the polar head group, the choline or whatever.
Or the ethanolamine. Right. So take-home message here for you is you're dietarily sufficient in your ethanolamines and in your cholines, which is important. Choline deficiency is quite prevalent in our society, and it's linked to pancreatic cancer, liver disease, and a bunch of things. So you don't want choline deficiency. So the bottom line here is that your nutrition background is excellent. And then the plasmalogen pool relative to the phosphatidyl pool is leading a little bit. The report's organized so that on the left-hand side, we're dealing with the percentile, which is useful from, say, 15 to 85 in the middle range.
And who's the reference population for that?
Just a random population of people from basically age 20 to 65, roughly.
So no gender and no age discrimination.
Yeah, we do that in fancier work, but it's kind of irrelevant for this purpose because it's not supposed to be that. It's not that decision. What we're really interested in is how your individual biomarker profile lays on top.
Changes with time. Yeah.
And otherwise, people get obsessed with minor changes, and that's not really helpful. The Z-score is more of a statistically valid number. It looks at how many standard deviations from the mean you are. And that helps at the very high levels and high and low levels. So take home here is that you're sufficient. The DHA portion of it is lower than the regular portion, which means you have a slight DHA deficiency. So if your DHA levels were equal to all the other fatty acids, this 30-43 would be 61. Okay, it would be the same percentage, but it's less, which means of the pool, your pool is the DHA proportion is relatively less than the total pool, and that shows up more down below. Okay, so basically, take home message here: there's no red flags. People with Alzheimer's will often have low levels of plasmalogens, like their phosphatidyl's will be fine, but the plasmalogens will be really low. People with, say, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease could have ethanolamines way up here because their liver can't convert them. Some strict vegetarians that aren't eating any eggs or they're deficient dietarily, you can see choline levels low, which means they're just not getting enough.
For a 34-year-old, this is probably appropriate. How would you predict without intervention that these levels may move by the time he's 50 in 16 years? Would they drop precipitously? Would they drop at all?
Okay. It depends on if he lives a healthy lifestyle, maintains moderate exercise, resistance training, he'll stay here. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, my dad's at the 85th percentile here, and he was before.
But he's taking supplements.
I had him there before we had the supplements available. So if the proper diet and program, you can maintain these things quite a lot. But so we still want him even higher than that long term, because we want to push that distribution to reserve stores.
The 95th percentile.
Yeah.
And just apologies to nitpick, but I don't know how it happened, but I'm 36.
That was me. That when I sent in your sample, I didn't actually have your date because you corrected it. So
no worries, not a big deal. I just wanted to.
When it goes in the system, we'll fix it. Yeah.
Cool, no worries.
So that's basically no red flags there. That's what we want to look for there. Okay, and so people with children with autism or women with multiple sclerosis, sometimes you'll have this really excessive plasmalogen ratio, which means that they have mitochondrial failure. Okay, so there's these ratios. This is, you saw part of the profile up there, but it's no one escapes the first law of thermodynamics, which is energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. So what comes in must come out. The books will always balance. We just don't always like the way they do that. And so so autism and multiple sclerosis, when they have mitochondrial failure, it'll push these plasmalogens due to overactivity. In an unnatural way, in the wrong place. So dietary fatty acids is the next phase. We want to look at your relative proportions because we live in a world where we're bombarded with omega-6 linoleic acid. So there's three main fatty acids in our diet supply. The omega-9, which is oleic acid. So it's a single double bond. So it's called a monounsaturated fatty acid. And that's what 18-1 is here. So there's two series of fatty acid, of phospholipids, and you'll notice that the first fatty acid stays the same, 18, 18, 18, 18, and this group 16, 16, 16, 16. That means keeping the anchor exactly identical, and all we're changing is the bioactive SN2 fatty acid, the one that gets released with, say, phospholipase activity, okay? And sometimes, right now, you've got low levels of this omega-9, but it's kind of irrelevant because your omega-9 is in phosphorylcholine. So this could be just a random Saturday in the lab type of thing. So don't get overly obsessed with it. The most important thing is 5G and H and 5C and D. So what we want to see is your omega-3 DHA levels high and your arachidonic acid levels low. And so you're seeing here that you're relatively normal, but typically if we get more DHA, we drive arachidonic acid down. Arachidonic acid, so of the three, so the second one is the linoleic acid, which is your omega-6, that has 18 carbons, 2 double bonds. This is kind of your inspector gadget fatty acid. It can act as an omega-9 for membrane glial cells, your Schwann cells. They use for protective coating. 18-1 is used for that primarily. 18-2 is really used a lot in your cholesterol transport system. So your phosphorylcholine makes esterified cholesterol so it can get transported. And then the omega-6 can get extended to this longer chain, 20 carbons, 4 double bonds, the long chain polyunsaturated fatty acid. And it's these that give our membranes fluidity. The omega-3, which we get from, say, flax and grass-fed meats, it gets basically converted to these long chain polyunsaturated, DHA. Very little of it is used in its natural state. It's almost entirely all converted, which is why it's useless to actually measure alpha-linolenic acid. It's not really relevant. So what happens here, though, is if you don't get enough omega-3 in your diet and you don't convert and make enough DHA, your body will make arachidonic acid to fill up the difference. Okay, so we don't get a lot of arachidonic acid in our diet. We physically make it ourselves. So when you see this ratio here, and it's a little more balanced here in the phosphorylcholine pool, is that you need a little more DHA and your body's making a little bit
too much arachidonic acid to compensate.
So that's the whole story here. And then we quickly look at the omega-9, omega-6 ratio here and here to look at, it can be an indicator of ovarian and breast cancer, and there's elongase function. When you have active cell growth in the body, when your body is making a lot of arachidonic acid on demand, it starts sucking this linoleic acid level down. So bottom line here is, again, fairly healthy profile. So nothing out of the ordinary here. We can do a little bit better by pushing your omega-3s up and pushing your arachidonic acid levels down. GTAs are another class of molecules that we discovered several years ago that are really related to gut health, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer. They're very, very potent anti-inflammatory molecules. They basically counteract the biological activity of C-reactive proteins. So they reduce inflammation and they're anti-cancer. They're made by your gut microbiome. And we don't have.
Do they have any idea how they work at all? They're like ultra long chain fatty acids.
Oh yeah,
they're like 44 carbons or something like that. They're
28, 30, and 36 carbon lengths. They're COX-2 inhibitors, so they reduce that. They will completely block lipopolysaccharide mediated TNF alpha, I beta kappa T,
NF kappa B, sure.
Yeah, that pathway completely blocks it as well. So we've isolated molecules and did all the biological activity of them.
I love
it. Then there's also this whole microRNA work in colitis and so on that they're important in, which is another story. So you're good here. That's excellent. So iron, I keep a look on iron because there's more fancy iron tests. This is just a quick gut check. Total iron levels, people can get anemic and not know it. We think about iron primarily for transport of oxygen and hemoglobin, but your electron transfer chain in mitochondria use iron, the peroxisomes use iron. Anything in the human body that basically transforms gaseous molecular oxygen requires iron. Low levels of iron are linked to high mortality if you're in the hospital. So low iron is a bad deal. We don't want low iron. It creates a weakness for a number of things. And we don't want to get too much iron because it's really hard to get rid of it when you get too much. The only way you get rid of iron is that you can lose some of it in your feces. We lose some of it in our sweat. So you want to creep your iron up to optimal levels. So you're fine. You could be a little bit more, but just probably from being an active guy, it can come down a bit. So take home message from page 1 is you're a pretty healthy guy. This looks good. Your diet is actually pretty good. And for like a free range chicken that we just pluck off the farmyard, you're pretty good. So
that's what we eat. We eat free range organic chicken from my brother's farm. He's organic farming. So
there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So you're a free range chicken.
Okay, so now,
hey Dan, real quick on the omega-3s, I assume I can just be taking maybe a little bit more omega-3 pill, maybe have a little bit more salmon, and that should hopefully raise those levels. Yeah,
exactly. And what you're doing in today's day and age, it's not just the omega-3 is not just for your own omega-3 needs. It's also to drive the arachidonic acid down. Okay, we actually have to overcompensate for the corn, soy, canola energy sources that are in everything, even the chicken that you eat. Like even if it's like if your chickens are corn fed, okay, they're eating omega-6, right?
Well, they're not.
So,
they eat a lot of leftover food from my brother-in-law's, their table. So they might get a little bit of corn, but they're getting scraps of leftover fruits and vegetables and all sorts of things like that.
And other chickens.
Yeah, but it's like omega-6 is kind of like salt. It's in everything. Like even when you get olive oil will have omega-6 in it too. So even fish oils will have some omega-6 in it. Like it's always there. We just have more of it than normal. That's all. And so here, when we were talking about before, so your ethanolamine, so the methyltransferase system, the take home is the homocysteine system, right? And homocysteine is a biomarker of excessive methyltransferase activity in the body. So if you're, say, Parkinson's patients and you're taking L-DOPA therapy, L-DOPA is a precursor to methyltransferase. It sucks up a whole bunch of the methyltransferase capacity, and your homocysteine levels go up 50% higher than normal people. And so low homocysteines are because it indicates methyltransferase reserve capacity, which means you have more than enough capacity to do methyltransferase when you need to. Homocysteine is a careful molecule because in today's day and age, we have a lot of people taking good supplements. They're taking their B12, they're taking their B6, they're taking methylfolate. And so I call it the leaky boat syndrome. You have a boat with a big hole in it, water is rushing in, but you have such a great sump pump. You're pumping the water out of the boat just as fast as it's coming in. And you're looking at that boat and says, boy, look at that boat. Doesn't it float nice? And that's not really what's happening. So we look at ethanolamine and choline ratios, which look good. And then sphingomyelin to ceramide, which for you doesn't. Okay, so single myelins, and you always want to be careful because we're taking a blood sample, right? We're not, punching a hole in your brain or in your heart to get your muscles, right? So we have to infer what's going on in your body from what we see in the blood. And the good news is metabolism equilibrates. So even if it's not 100 1-to-1 relationship, it does tell us what's going on. And so when you see sphingomyelin going down and ceramide going up, this indicates that you have some membrane turnover. It's some inflammation. It could be simply a good workout routine where you did 10 reps of curls and shoulder exercises, and that's great because you're creating oxidative stress and you're working out and you're creating this temporary demand for membranes that you just finished breaking apart, and that'll happen and it'll come back again. So this is not bad. Controlled stress is what keeps us alive. So the point here, though, is that your homocysteine is still fine, 11. Like to have it under 10. People get obsessed. They want it down 6, 7, whatever it is. But clinically speaking, anything under 10 is good. We can target down here because below that, it doesn't really matter. It's all the same. So for you, with what's going on here, you probably should put some more N-acetylcysteine into your diet. Okay, N-acetylcysteine, we don't take enough of it, especially for today's inflammatory world. It's one of the best biochemical anti-inflammatories mechanistically. It makes sure your glutathione levels are high, and it's on demand during microglial or macrophage inflammation. So anyways.
A paper just came out, I think last week, where they were using a product from Nestle, and they showed, which is an NAC spiked with some glycine and maybe a couple of other things, but they actually showed cognition improvements and a whole bunch of other things in vivo in people, in humans. So
yeah, they were doing like 10 grams a day. I think that paper was.
It was a lot.
But it's good, though. I wouldn't recommend that much, but it's good to indicate, though. I think and I say that to a lot of our doctors right now, is that we've been a little bit too conservative with N-acetylcysteine. Other thing with N-acetylcysteine, if you like to drink a little bit here and there, it's the biggest thing for preventing hangovers and also making sure that the liver function after a bender doesn't, it's N-acetylcysteine. So if someone accidentally swallows a bottle of Tylenol and you get shipped to the emergency room, N-acetylcysteine is what they give you IV to keep you alive. So it's an important molecule. It's a very simple biochemical intermediate. Okay,
so Dan, what you're saying is if I go to like the bar or something and I get overserved, I want to take N-acetylcysteine then. After
you might want to take it, maybe take a half hour, an hour before you go, just in case they overserve you.
It's definitely not my fault. It's just if I get
exactly if they spike your Shirley Temple and you're prepared. Yeah. And so the next one is mitochondrial function. Okay. And actually, you have a perfect textbook version of mitochondrial function, which is great. So,
and what textbook is it that talks about this kind of, mitochondrial function?
It's basically my unwritten textbook again. Well, I've written chapters on it. So there's the chapter.
Yes, you have. Well, it makes sense. It makes sense too. But
sclerosis. So what happens so your purpose of your mitochondria is to burn acetyl-CoA. That's the fuel. The human body. I tell people the human body is a series level electric car. That's how we run. We're a hydrocarbon burning engine that we burn hydrocarbons. The hydrocarbons are used to charge a battery, and then that battery is used to drive an engine called the ATP pump. Okay, so we take hydrocarbons, whether it's sugar or fat, doesn't matter. Ultimately, it gets digested to a simple little 2-carbon molecule called acetyl-CoA. That goes into your mitochondria. First part goes through your citric acid cycle, and that converts it into carbon dioxide, just like your car engine. That's what we breathe out, carbon dioxide. And the second part is it takes that carbon dioxide, but it converts it and it creates high energy electrons and acids, protons. And then those high energy electron, which is your NADH system and acidity, goes into your electron transport chain of your mitochondria, and it drives that hydrogen pump. It creates a gradient, which is basically a battery, charges a battery, puts protons on one side of a membrane, proton deficit on another side. And then that charged battery runs this ATP pump that generates ATP for the whole body. And you generate your entire body weight of ATP every day. That's how active this thing is. Like, 180 pounds or 190 pounds of actual physical ATP is created
people
every
think
day.
if you think you're some little static thing that sits there all day, even though you're not moving, exactly what's going on is like unbelievable.
Little bonfires. So we're electrochemical. Okay, so the point is, this is the simplest little mitochondrial test on the planet. All I look for is mitochondrial leakage. And for any reason, okay, you got a genetic mutation from your mom, you are deficient in CoQ10, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You got a viral infection and your mitochondria get stressed. Your mitochondria can't process its acetyl-CoA and it leaks out. And the body does something with it. And one of the things it does is fatty acid elongation. And so this adrenic acid will start creeping up. And when that happens, your adrenic acid will creep up, your linoleic acid will go down, arachidonic acid will go up. So this profile will be in the exact opposite direction. You'll see low linoleic.
So this part of the report, in effect, is like a smog check on your mitochondria.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And so what'll happen sometimes when people have good peroxisomal function but still have high triglycerides, so you take acetyl L-carnitine or alpha lipoic acid, and like these ones will help do this, because your mitochondria and your peroxisomes are your two organelles that actually burn fat. They take the fatty acids and oxidize them into water and carbon dioxide. And so they work hand in hand. So bottom line here, that looks great, which corresponds to nice low C-reactive protein levels. Okay, under 1 is great. That's where you want to be. So 0.5, your GTA levels are good. So your inflammatory index is excellent. If we get C-reactive protein between 1 and 2 is kind of iffy, but when you get over 2, you have some systemic inflammation, like arthritis. People you have kidney failure, you have whatever. It could be a number of different reasons. And actually, when you work out, if you have low levels of DHA in your system and you work out, you will get C-reactive protein, and over the course of, say, a day and a half, that C-reactive protein will creep down again. But if you have good inflammatory index to start with, the exercise won't elevate C-reactive protein. So it tells you a lot. Prodrome Neuro, which is our DHA plasmalogen and affects HDL-mediated cholesterol transport stuff, lower C-reactive protein. So your HDL is really tied into your C-reactive protein, which is excellent. And your HDL levels are good too. So you're a healthy guy. So the elongase that we talked about earlier, that's where we want it to be. And then peroxisomal function here, the outcome is final triglycerides. The fasting triglycerides, people think of, triglycerides are probably one of the poorly understood, really good markers. high triglycerides is not exactly dangerous. There's nothing wrong with high triglycerides. After a meal, your triglycerides can be 1,000. They'll be here. Your blood could be white with fat. Okay, so if high triglycerides were bad, we would all die every day 1 hour after eating a meal. Okay, so clearly high triglycerides don't kill people because we get high triglycerides every day. The fasting triglycerides is different though. So when you eat a meal, your body's in the fed state and you're getting sugar and you're using the glycolysis system or the carbohydrate system to generate that acetyl-CoA that I mentioned for mitochondria. And after you finished eating, a few hours later, all of a sudden you eventually run out of carbohydrate energy. And at that point in time, your fat cells start acting like your stomach. So they start digesting the fat in their cells. The same way, so where you have gastric lipase in your stomach and your upper intestines, digest fat from your food, like olive oil. When you're in the fasting state, the same kind of lipase enzymes breaks down your fatty acid in your fat cells. And that gets distributed in your blood supply. And that free fatty acid goes into your livers. And
just a quick question, Dayan. Are those enzymes in your gastric that are responsible for this fatty acid sort of processing also the enzymes which destroy plasmalogen if taken unprotected?
No, the plasmalogen destruction happens actually in the hydrochloric stomach. So it's purely an acidic thing. It's not an enzymatic reaction. In the upper GI tract, what happens with phospholipids is they get digested by an enzyme called phospholipase. And that creates a lysophospholipid that gets absorbed. That's why we can't oral ingestion of fat of phospholipids. We can't target that SN2 position I was talking about. It gets all mixed up by the time it gets digested. So no, it's the plasmalogen degradation in the gut is chemical, not enzymatic. Okay, so what happens with triglycerides in the fasting state is that all the triglycerides in your blood actually are made. Like they're not coming from your diet. Your liver actually physically makes triglycerides from free fatty acids. And the only way it does that is if it can't metabolize the free fatty acids that are being sent to it from the adipose tissue. So if you're under inflammation, if mitochondrial failure, or you have peroxisomal failure, the cells of your body can't actually do that beta oxidation. And so so basically elevated triglycerides are exactly the same as acetyl-CoA leakage, but from the peroxisome perspective. It's saying, hey, I can't process these fatty acids you're sending me. Okay, and so what it does is it puts it back on a triglyceride and sends them back to your fat cells. So your fat cells are sending fatty acids and your liver cells sending triglycerides back. And so
sounds like an Amazon, poorly run Amazon warehouse.
Exactly. And so you have low triglyceride, and that typically says mitochondria and peroxisomal function are working in your body. And that's why intermittent fasting is so important. So whenever triglycerides get elevated, it tells us that one of those energy burning systems is not working. And this is why exercise and resistance training have such a good triglyceride lowering effect. And from a medical epidemiological perspective, whereas high triglycerides are not necessarily bad, low triglycerides are good. There's a health benefit. So whether you have 150 triglyceride levels, 250, or even 300 or 400, it makes no difference. Those all have the same epidemiological outcomes. It's low triglycerides that actually have a health benefit. And their benefit is in all-cause mortality, not in cardiovascular mortality. So low triglycerides have reduced your overall mortality in ways unrelated to your cardiovascular health. It's pretty cool. Would you
just say that low triglycerides just tell you that all of your membranes and your systems are tight and that the acetyl-CoA isn't falling off of the carts and,
Well, it's actually an indirect marker of good plasmalogens and good HDL. So if you have low triglycerides, basically means your peroxisomes are working. If your peroxisomes are working, you're making plasmalogens. And it's the plasmalogens that really have, like when we put the plasmalogens in the statistical models, it pretty well eliminates triglycerides a risk factor.
I
So-
gotcha.
So people with high plasmalogens will typically have low triglycerides and good HDL levels.
And Dan, I just want to point out one thing, which is that this blood work was done on April 1st, 2021 here at my house. We had a phlebotomist come here, and I believe that it was 9 a.m. Pacific time. And I believe that I was about 16 hours fasted. I was told by Kevin, I think, to be at least 10 hours fasted. 8 to 10. Yeah. And just because I practice intermittent fasting daily, I try to get to at least bare minimum 16 hours every day. Normally I get to 18 or 20 every day. I try to keep my eating window to about 6 to 4 hours. So I just want to, point that out for the audience to know like what I do normally and where we're at right here. I think that's important.
That is one of the most important health lifestyle effects that we can do as humans. And one of the challenges with cancer and a lot of diseases is that when you switch from fasting to fed, it's like shifting gears. It should just go click, click. It should and you should be in fed mode, then you should switch right to fasting mode. And what happens when we eat late at night or we have high glycemic foods on multiple periods is that the cells of our body don't switch to the fasting state, which means they don't switch to the fatty acid
Cleanup mode. They don't clean up.
Yes. And that's fundamentally a cancerous mode. So cancer cells have, so women who have a BRCA mutation, okay, that's exactly what BRCA does. The BRCA mutation in women with breast cancer, why those women have a high risk of breast cancer is because the mutated BRCA protein prevents those cells from switching into the fasting mode. So and people say, oh, cancer cells love sugar. That's not true. Cancer cells will die without sugar. They need sugar. It's not that they want sugar, it's that they can't get their acetyl-CoA from fatty acids because that fatty acid metabolism is shut down for them. So they must get their acetyl-CoA from sugar. And so that forces them to suck sugar from the surrounding cells, and it becomes a parasitic cell mass to the surrounding community. So anyways, that fasting intermittent thing is one of the most important things people can do health-wise.
You can starve a cancer, basically, and prevent cancers from even getting a foothold.
Pretty much. A cell that's in a fasting mode basically can't become cancerous. So then the cholesterol transport system, again, this is pretty well perfect. HDL has a nice window from about 40 at the low end for men to about 80. You don't want to get much higher than 80 or even 100, so to speak. The upper end is fine. You just definitely want to get around less than 40, but it's pretty flat in the middle. Like the actually ideal one is about 65 roughly for men, but it's that window there is pretty good. Total cholesterol, you want to be over 200, which is exactly where you are. And so when you see someone with low total cholesterol, that means one of two things is happening. Either they have liver failure, and typically that is associated with low levels of phosphatidylcholine, because the liver has to make the cholesterol and it has to package it on the LDL particles for distribution throughout the body. And then the second part is your peripheral cellular demand for cholesterol. If the cells of your body are sick and they can't make their own cholesterol, then they're sucking cholesterol out of the blood supply. And when they do that, they lower cholesterol. So when you see someone with low total cholesterol, it's either a liver failure or a cellular failure, or they're intentionally causing their cells to be cholesterol starved, or say like a statin. Because what statins do is they block the cells from making their own cholesterol and force the cells to take their cholesterol from the blood supply. So that's why we don't want.
So that would be mainly dietary cholesterol, because presumably you would be inhibiting cholesterol synthesis in the liver as well.
Yeah, your dietary supply is relatively limited long term. So most of it's made. And it's not just the making of it, it's also the packaging of it, the esterification of it. And then the second part is the HDL levels. That's the ability of your cells to get rid of cholesterol. And so it's the cell import and export. And this is how the cell manages its cholesterol levels. Okay, because the cell is the master of its own domain. It will take the cholesterol it needs and it will export the cholesterol it does not need. The LDL system does not push itself into the cells, and the HDL system does not come around sucking cholesterol out of the cells. Okay, so HDL is your cellular export mechanism. And so if you have healthy plasmalogens and healthy DHA levels, you're making cholesterol and you're exporting cholesterol, and your HDL levels will equilibrate to that. And so typically what you'll see, a healthy profile will be high plasmalogens, low triglycerides, high HDL, and good total cholesterol. Those come all together. And that's basically what we see in your profile here, is generally a healthy profile. And then kidney function, again, these are things, the creatinine and the uric acid, it doesn't necessarily be kidney related, but this is another one which is a big U-shape. We focus on high creatinine issues for kidney issues, but actually low creatinine is a far more dangerous thing in the elderly. It's an indicator of muscle wasting. If you're working out, your creatinine can get up a bit.
But if you're taking supplemental creatine, which is what, this is creatinine, not creatine.
Yeah, so creatine, we supplement to provide more methyltransferase capacity. So that's something you could put into your diet as well. Actually, you could add a couple grams of creatine into your diet. That'll help bring your homocysteine down a little bit. Creatinine. Yeah. So creatinine comes from phosphocreatine. So your creatine system is balanced between your kidneys and your liver. It's a multi-organ system. Your liver creates what's called a guanidine acetate, GAA. Okay, and GAA goes back to the liver, and methyltransferase creates creatine. And then that creatine goes into your muscles, and your muscles uses that creatine to make phosphocreatine. And then when it gets broken down, when phosphocreatine gets broken down, it creates creatinine. And that's what we measure for blood. And it's used in kidney failure because its primary means of excretion is through urine. And so if you have kidney failure issues and and they use it to calculate what's called a glomerular filtration rate. And that determines how good your kidney cells are filtering polar metabolites out of the blood supply.
So even if you're working out, producing a lot of creatinine, you should still see the levels in a reasonable range.
Yeah, for a man, you're exactly where you want to be. 1.0 is the exact level you want for a man. 0.9 is okay for women as a general. And if you're working out, having levels at 1.1, 1.2 is fine. Okay, even higher, depending upon when you're taking the blood sample relative to the work. But what we see in sarcopenia and muscle wasting in the elderly, you see these creatinine levels get down to 0.6, 0.4. Okay, and that you see that in starvation. So what will also happen with choline deficiencies, what can happen, this methyltransferase system. So your body's going to have to choose sometimes, right? Like if you're choline deficient and it's only got so many methyls to work with, it's going to make choline and not make creatine. And if it's not making creatine,
your muscles will waste.
Your muscles will waste and your creatinine levels will go down. So again, low creatinine is far more dangerous than high creatinine. But that seems to be like a common theme of stuff that you're saying in this report, is that like the body's going to take or find a way to get what it needs. So what I think one of your master skills is looking at this and saying, this might be off, but it's not a big deal, or this is off, but you can, change this to get that back. And it's just really complicated. And I think that you're dumbing it down and explaining it, really well.
Dayan has a picture of the Rube Goldberg machine that is biochemistry, with all the pulleys and the cables that are attached and the weights and which ones are important and which ones aren't and how they're interconnected. And he just can look at this stuff and interpret it like that. It's like a tea leaf reader, perhaps, or an astrologer. Yeah. But
or a simple metabolic accountant. The books must balance. And so if they're out of balance,
that's a good one.
Like they're going to be somewhere else, right? And so if one thing is, so that's kind of what it comes down to. And they should. And when you look at a report like this, things should fit. And you'll notice that differently. If someone has low levels of choline, you'll see homocysteine being up a little bit, and you'll see their cholesterol being down a little bit. And so these are little things that you can tweak. What's nice thing about biochemistry is there's not a single line item here that can't be modified. okay, with basic supplements, basic lifestyle issues. And so, your blood urea nitrogen is great down the middle because you're eating a regular diet. Uric acid is an interesting molecule actually, because it's got totally different profiles, low versus high. So Parkinson's patients, ALS patients, multiple sclerosis, they'll all have uric acids way down in the 3s and 4s, even down like it's very, very reproducible. But if you have gout or if you have fatty acid, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, you can see them up in the 6, 7, 8 range. Okay, so people worry about uric acid for gout because you get too much uric acid, it can crystallize, and that creates the massive, painful, inflammatory state. But then you can fix that too, like high vitamin C, cherries, pomegranate will bring those down. Whereas you take N-acetylcysteine and other antioxidant anti-inflammatories, they can bring your low uric acids up to the middle. And so if you have a viral infection, it'll lower your uric acid levels because uric acid comes from your purine metabolism, actually from ATP and ADP. So what'll happen, and it's also involved in your endothelial function. So that's what is happening here. So for you, you're right down the middle. Uric acid is a little bit on the high side. And so if you, but from beer and wine and drinking a little bit, that can creep up a little bit here and there. And so for you, N-acetylcysteine would probably bring that down as well. A little bit of creatine, a little bit of, that's it. And so that's kind of what it comes down to.
I'll just say this is a perfect example about how many points you measure, well-chosen points you measure in a dynamic system where you're generating your body weight worth of ATP every day. You are you're on fire. Your whole body's on fire. Everything's burning. It's using up all of these things. Then it's generating a whole bunch of things. We need to be able to measure the important things that are being used up and the important things that are being generated and where out of balance, how they're connected and where out of balance. Right now, medicine doesn't do that at all.
Well, they're focused on chasing a disease. And so a lot of these general markers, people say, oh, C-reactive protein is a terrible marker because it's not specific to any one disease. It's linked to like 10 different diseases. Well,
that sounds like a good marker.
Yeah. Exactly. Why is that a bad thing? Right? But that's how we think. It's not very specific, so it can't tell me.
It's because our whole healthcare system is actually sick care and trauma care. It's not about preventative medicine and precision medicine and true healthcare. So that's what we're trying to change.
And now if you want to get into more fancy stuff, if you're an ALS patient and then you want to start getting peptide therapy and you want to do other things, if you can get these core systems in place, and then you go into some exosomes or stem cells, if you do some more fancy stuff that you want to play around with, at least you're working from a strong base. Okay, then you're going to get the maximum benefit from those other fancy therapies.
Yeah. If you know where the gaping holes are in your biochemistry and you actually fill them, then you can start doing more exotic things, knowing that you're starting from a better foundation, that you don't have to, try to patch something up before you can get those benefits.
Correct.
I think it's fantastic. Is there anything in the planet that resembles the ProdromeScan?
Well, your report's looking up.
Well, I think that's close to I think it is the ProdromeScan. I mean, we can combine, the more biomarkers we measure, the more this is the metabolic. Another thing we never really mentioned is that when you're testing the metabolism and the metabolites, you're actually measuring your environment to some degree. You're not measuring necessarily simply the internal combustion or workings, but you're also measuring how good the environment is at providing you with these necessary inventory components that you need. And nobody approaches health like that. Everybody wants to know, even in our research community, they want to know the proteins. What are the tools that are working on the metabolites, basically? Show me the wrenches and the hammers. I don't want to know what the nuts and bolts are doing so much as I want to know what the hammers are doing. And I think you get much more information.
Which is really ironic, right? Because we have 60 years of drug design. All small molecule drug design is metabolomics.
I know, it's hilarious.
From the very first drug, chlorpromazine, which was originally designed for tuberculosis back in the 40s and 50s, and they realized it was treating schizophrenia. From that day forward, we've been trying to mimic human biochemistry, And so all these drugs that we take, they basically are metabolite mimetics to interact with those proteins. And so it's really ironic that we've been spending 60 years really looking at how to
recreating the wheel, basically. It's trying to
Well, and we know that's how we manipulate the human system, by changing the metabolites. And so we can turn, even epigenetics and stuff that is all basically driven by the metabolism. So anyways, so that's kind of, so it's starting from the ground up, and then we can get more and more complicated as time goes on. But this is the first.
So what do you think, Brent? Did you like this one?
Yeah, I thought it was very helpful. It's, awesome. I really appreciate it. I was wondering if Dan had, just a few more minutes for me to ask a few follow-up questions, or if you have to run.
Yeah, no, I'm working tonight, so.
Okay. So, Kevin and I, we have, very similar mission. Kevin's the co-founder, CEO of OpenCures. I'm the co-founder, CEO of Longevity Plan. And we've both been very passionate about, longevity. And I know that you are as well too, Dan. And, I follow a lot of the science very closely. I host a show called Lifespan News. And so from all this, knowledge that I've added up in my head, I've come to realize that, our goal is to, solve the human aging problem, to stay as young and healthy biologically as possible. I think that's pretty much what all of us are trying to do, biological immortality, whatever you want to call it. And I think in order to do that, we have to really figure out what actually slows, stops, and reverses human aging, and to what extent. And so I think that there's all these different tests. I think that, what we've just gone over, what you've shown us with the Prodrome, that's really important. But as Kevin just said a few minutes ago, data, is really key here. So I think what's important is if we can get all these different tests and then use machine learning and add them all up and figure out what actually, so for example, Grim Age, if just to explain it to the audience, Grim Age is kind of one of the newest clocks that Dr. Steve Horvath at UCLA has pioneered and developed. His original clock was in 2013, and they've kind of iterated and improved every year or so. Commercially right now, the only company that I know of that actually allows you to purchase commercially the 2013 DNA methylation clock from Steve Horvath is a company called My DNA Age. But there is a company that I'm in contact with that we're partnered with at Longevity Plan called the Clock Foundation. Their, I believe, CEO is Bobby Brooke. And Bobby Brooks at UCLA, and hopefully this Grim Age test is going to be available soon. So the point is that Grim Age is, from my research, it's the single best predictor of your mortality of any other single statistic, and that's including your own chronological age. So it's truly kind of like the best biological aging clock out there. On March 16th on Lifespan News, we reported about a new transcriptome-based clock that's brand new, and it might actually be more accurate at predicting your biological age than Grim Age. It's very, very new. We'll find out. But the point is that if we can add up all these tests together and we can figure out okay, this individual is this biological age according to Grim Age, and look at how good his Prodrome stats are, and then keep retesting all of these over and over again, I think that's going to really help us figure out. And then, boom, he just had exosomes injected here. He had stem cells injected, so on and so forth. I think this is really going to be the way that we're going to figure this out, because this is essentially going to be if any company or just many different companies working together in a decentralized manner can do this, then I think we can start to really work together and figure out very quickly what's slowing, stopping, and reversing human aging. And this can essentially become, whether it's one organization or many decentralized, the largest kind of ongoing clinical human trial on aging. And I think that's really what needs to be done, because, sadly, governments and big institutions, corporations, they're just failing us massively. They have insane budgets, and they don't see it this way. And I'm waiting for somebody to kind of prove me wrong. My Longevity Plan team will be meeting with Dr. Aubrey tomorrow morning, is one of our scientific advisors. And, we're going to kind of go over our short-term business model and what we've been figuring out. But I don't know if I'm speaking another language, Dan. I don't think so. But if there's anything there that doesn't make sense or you disagree with, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think there's multiple. I have a book coming out called Breaking Alzheimer's that should be launched before the end of the month. And in the last chapter, I go through that in quite detail. I go through the issues that we have with institutional medicine. I go through the Bayh-Dole Act and how it's kind of destroyed our public institutional contract with off-patent technologies. So I'm definitely on the same page as you guys on that. And I think multiple approaches are helpful. In terms of aging, like I'm not, like you mentioned chronological age, I'm not a big anti-aging person. I really don't really believe in aging. And in fact, I don't want to stop aging. I just want to continue aging. Okay, because I want to be 500 years old, and I want to age another 100 years. Okay, so I don't want to go back to my 20s and forget all the things that I learned in my 30s and 40s and 50s. Okay, and so I want to be able to perpetuate aging. I want to age.
I want to get older. Right? I don't want to fall apart.
Correct. And so the question becomes, when we break this down into core components of, and I call it the ability to maintain dual making. Okay, at the quantum mechanical level, it's actually, that's growth is, right? We're continuing to be able to use consciousness to change our biological activity going forward. That's the factor involved. So I go through those things. So the different types of clocks are important. The challenge with clocks is that we have done a very good job. In the last 150 years, we've improved average life expectancy by over 30 years, from late 40s, early 50s till the mid 80s. But we virtually have had zero impact on maximum lifespan. And actually, we have statistically had zero. The numbers have gone up. Maybe in the last 150 years, our maximum lifespan gone up maybe 10 years, from 102 to 108. But that's actually false, because what we've done is we've created a larger distribution of elderly people. So the tails, we have a larger statistical pool. So by definition, we're going to randomly get more people at the tail end, upper tail. Right. So we have done absolutely nothing related to maximum human lifespan. Okay. And that's the challenge. And so the understanding of human lifespan, we have to move back into optimized function, but maintaining function indefinitely. And there's issues relating to the aging process of we train ourselves to be old, okay, mentally. Like you can use conceptual language of, cells learn to be conservative because they react to negative stimuli, and then they remember negative stimuli. It's like a social interaction network, right? You start off life being outwardly gregarious and you want to make friends, and then you go out to a party and you get a negative interaction and you get, I didn't feel good. And so then you're a little more cautious next party you go to, right? And if you go to the next party and all of a sudden, you get treated nicely for the next little while, so you kind of start to forget the bad experience. But if you get the bad experience 2 or 3 more times, you stop going to parties altogether. And cells kind of have that memory, right? And so they'll forget if you give them long enough time from a negative insult to live in an environment. And so our genes are there to protect us. We shouldn't fight our genes. If we make it past our first year of life, our genes are there. Like, our genes are silent. They have no control over all the dumb shit we do to ourselves. And so they have to say, what the hell are you guys going to do today to me? And they're going to have a set of options that they can react to. And they're going to learn, okay, under what conditions I can keep you alive, because your genes are trying to keep you alive every day, and they have limited options, and they train themselves. And as we get older, we lose plasticity, but we lose plasticity because we get better at lesser functions. Okay. And so you have to relearn to be young, and your cells have to relearn, but we have to do it carefully, because you can't just take, an old engine and put jet fuel in it. And so
is it like that Yoda quote? You must unlearn what you have learned.
That's exactly right. That's a certain degree. And so for me, on the aging side, functionality, I'm very interested in that. And I'll be starting longitudinal clinical trials starting probably by the end of the year to do all that, metabolically, but others. But so don't know. I don't think there's a genetic answer. I'm more of a biochemist, entropy.
It's a system. It's a systems problem,
It is.
and we have. I think there is entropy. There is informational degradation as a result of environmental influences, let alone the things that you do bad to yourself. So you're fighting a losing battle. But if you can at least find out what are the major big levers that we're still ignorant of, that, plasmalogens, for instance, or various other things, we can see how many more kilometers or miles we can get out of this chassis just by balancing things in an intelligent way, in a way that we know is optimal. And it could be, as Dayan, I think, is implying, that there may not be an upper limit to how much balancing we can do that will keep us going. Maybe not in our 20-year-old physiological form, but it's
think about it practically. So the 108-year-old persons that die, they don't all die of the same thing. It's not on that date their heart goes. And then one person, it's a lung problem. One person, it's a heart problem. One person, it's a brain problem. And so fundamentally, even that 110-year-old person who died
may have a chance. Yeah.
Well, we know for a fact there's certain physiological functions of that person who was not ready to die at 110. So by definition, that
I agree.
Every single physiological function of that person did not stop on the one.
Which is why I don't believe in. Which is why I agree. I don't believe in aging per se as much either. What I believe in is these losses of function, which are discrete, and because you don't die of aging. You die of something going wrong, a system failure in some essential component of your system.
So the goal for me is identify the maintenance of function, because disease actually is a mutually exclusive situation. You cannot have function and disease simultaneously. It's not possible. Diseases are not, we give aging and we give diseases the power of protagonistic thought. Like they are out to get us, like they're plotting our demise, and they're not that smart. Diseases aren't deterministic; they're opportunistic. They appear when lack of function appears, and so if we can focus on maintenance of function, there is no place for disease. And the trick for us is to understand that prodrome of functional loss, and if it's on the protein level, if it's on the gene expression level, there's many different levels, and if it's requiring, how do you create that biochemical reserve or the functional reserve? Is it through exosomes? Is it through peptide injections, or is it through biochemical? It's the strategic application of maintaining that functional capacity that really should be indefinite. There really isn't.
But I think that even if you're doing the biochemical balancing indefinitely, you still have cells that need to be replaced. You have different sort of macro levels of interoperability at sort of the cellular level. But then again, if we could fix the biochemistry just for homeostatic purposes, just for keeping things the same from day to day, year to year, we should be able to deal with the demands of regeneration. And
you got to build it from the bottom up. Okay. Yeah. Immortality is the mitochondria, first and foremost. And then it has to be built step by step upward from that. Human life is mitochondrial, first and foremost. The entire human body is built brick by brick above that. It's electrochemical. What causes the inflammatory cascades, what causes glial infiltration. Those is whenever a cell loses. I tell this, here's the analogy. Okay, your cells in your body are like your houses in the neighborhood. Okay, the cell, no one knows what the hell's going on in the house or in the cell. And so until I tell people, until a chair comes crashing through a window and lands on the front lawn, you have no idea what's going on in someone else's house. And our cells are the same way. And so fundamentally, all cellular death is electrochemical death by definition. Now we have multiple levels of protection, but when the cell no longer can maintain its electron balance, it starts spitting electrons out. And then we have many systems. We have superoxide dismutase, we have catalase, we have glutathione peroxidase, we have a bunch of systems that do that. But as soon as they fail, we get lipid peroxidation, and that brings in the cavalry to kill the cell and kill the debris. So when you start stacking those memory, so when a cell tries to protect itself, okay, it turns on epigenetics, it turns down systems. As soon as it senses it's getting close to overheating and dying, it's going to shut down every system that it can to prevent itself from dying. The question is how long is it going to take it for it to say, is it safe for it to open those systems up again? Okay, and that's the definition of cellular senescence. So a senescent cell has just trained itself, saying it's become so scared that if it opens up any of its systems, that it will create death. And so when you build things upward from there, so we have memory. And so when we talk about immortality, it starts there. And then the cellular division things limits the cell.
I think more than saying once we keep the bio.
It's like people trying to figure, look at a city. How does a guy at 7-Eleven know how much milk to buy? And the guy down the street that comes in and picks up the milk and all of a sudden, okay, there's no central command on.
It's a free market. Yeah. It's decentralized.
Right? But it has a logic to it, right? And each local environment is its own little domain, and it makes adjustments to it. And so when we try central planning to a certain degree, every cell is 1 trillion cells in your body, and every single one of those trillion cells has its own logic, has its own DNA. Okay? Every single one of your 1 trillion cells has exactly the same DNA. Every single one will have a slightly different proteome. Every single one. Okay, because that single cell is responsible for that cell. And it's responsible for keeping that cell alive based upon whatever is going to happen to it, how much glucose comes into it, whether the neighboring cell is out of control or whatever the hell it is, right? And so it's going to modify its proteome for itself, okay? And it's going to modify it for its local environment. And then it goes from that local environment one step further. And so when we start thinking about these larger
programmable systems,
the fuzzy logic of a city or the fuzzy logic of any complex system just doesn't operate that way. And so if we can start working our way downward and start early enough, like at your age and our ages, and saying, okay, how can you maintain this level of cellular safety, essentially? Okay, so what you want in a human society, right? The more trusting and egregiously outward is the best fun world to be in. Okay, no one wants to live in a paranoid, introverted world. That's no fun. And our cells are the same way. But in order to live in an extroverted cellular world, there needs to be trust. And the trust of your cellular system means that cells have to feel that they can be young without being punished by it. And we need to figure that out and maintain that youthfulness long term. And I think a lot of the rest of that stuff will take.
Well, I don't know. Well, I think maintaining everything fundamentally, all the systems balanced is like once you've reached adulthood and your body plan, you add a maximum size, everything's at top and it's spinning, right? And then over time, the energy comes out of the top and it starts to wobble. And what we're talking about is made because there's some internal component that is not in balance. And we can go in there and we can sort of rebalance the spin, maybe give it an extra go, but it really can't. Because you reach the apogee of your peak of perfection in your mid-20s or whatever, that everything, you lose the force of development, that whatever was pushing it to that point of perfect reproductive capacity, at that point, it lets go, that the force of keeping you going.
That's not true, actually. The brain the brain isn't mature until you're 55 to 60.
I'm not talking about the brain. I'm talking about the biological DNA replication, reproductive, testosterone. By the time you're 55, your hormones have, there are two things operating here. We have the biological sort of procreative kind of urge, which is what our body is basically built to do. And then we have our brains, which is intelligence overlaid on top of this DNA system, which I don't think the DNA ever really quite cared to have as a piggyback ride. It would be quite happy to have us really stupid. And, there's a lot of animals who have a lot less intelligence than us. Some of them even live longer. So what we do have is in animals that have tremendously long lifespans, rockfish and turtles and whales and things like that, they're continuously growing. They never actually reach their maximum body size. So they have the additional advantage of, I think, maybe being a better platform for what we're thinking about, in that they don't have this loss of forward thrust, which happens in most animals where they reach a maximum body size. So we will be able to balance the biochemistry if we could start at that point and then try and keep the biochemistry. But even then, we have to find some way of pushing, and wound healing does have that sort of capacity to induce regeneration. And there's a bunch of different ways we can sort of trick the body into a continuous healing sort of regenerative mode. But I think we're lacking that regeneration signals that even if you gave every system exactly what it wanted, we would still lose cells and eventually
bottom line is no one actually knows yet.
Let's do the experiment.
That's why it's so important to, start testing things more. I just want to say one real quick thing, Kevin. You talked about the fish. We just, this was a news story you guys might have heard about. It's been going around the past 10 days or so. And we just reported on it yesterday on Lifespan News, the buffalo or the big water buffalo. Have you guys heard about this fish? They just did this study on it. I had never heard of it personally. It's in yesterday's episode of Lifespan News. They studied these fish, a bunch of them, from age 2 to 102. And what I think is fascinating is not only does this fish show no sign of biological aging whatsoever, but it actually seems to be getting healthier as it gets chronologically older, which is
until it's eaten.
Until it gets so big that it's eaten or it dies of, disease or whatever. Some kind of crazy accident. But, I've known about Hydra for a long time. I've never heard of Hydra actually getting healthier.
Hydra's not an animal. Hydra's a colony. It's a polyp. It's the people who say hydras are immortal. It's not even the same individual from generation to generation.
It gets that critique.
I hate it when they talk about stuff like that.
Yeah, but the buffalo or the big water buffalo, check it out. It's been a very well done study and it's fascinating. So, and to clarify one point I was saying earlier, Dan, and I think that you understand this is more for the audience. It's just that, what Dan was saying is, yes, we want to continue to get older chronologically because that equals wisdom, experience. That's great. But we want to keep you as biologically young as possible because that's what equals health. And that's what I think the DNA methylation clocks and maybe this transcriptome based clock is, pretty accurate at showing the actual biological age. So if we can keep that as young as possible, that would be great. But there's still a lot we don't know.
Great.
I think
especially if you can modify your lifestyle and the interactions and then use it as a measure of success. That's excellent.
And then just to your point about small companies, Brent, small companies getting together to do things with new technology, we can leverage new technology. We can get an awful lot done that, 10 years ago would have taken 10, 20, 30 people. One person can do now with a computer and some data. And I think we're just got to find ways of interlocking and working together. Dan and I came together 2 years ago, almost with that sort of express purpose, that we were going to try to give this kind of level of information to people who wanted it. Because right now, individuals are not able to access this kind of information. I think the only way they can do it independently, like a biohacker, is through OpenCures. Right at this point, people can maybe work through their doctors. Dan's working with multiple doctors, and he's got certification programs. But this should be standard of care. This shouldn't be one company or two companies. This should be freaking Kaiser. It should be everywhere.
I know. And
we have multiple levels. Yeah. So that's I'm with you there. And it's like I tell people, I'm focused on three things. It's, mood, mobility, and mental acuity. If we can maintain those three things, if you can move in your life, get up and get down and physically interact in your environment, if you feel good, like if your mood is good, and if you can think straight, those are the three fundamental things. And so when we're going to start an MRI trial on the plasmalogens, but it's not just plasmalogens, there's other metabolic interactions involved. We believe we'll be showing some brain function. We can regrow the brain. We'll show the nucleus basalis swelling back up and stuff like that. So we have pretty we know even our initial clinical trials were showing improvement in function. And so we can actually move this in the right direction. And the next, but no one knows exactly where we can take this. And it's iterative. And so, yes, so this plasmalogen or this ProdromeScan, this is the simplest of them all. Like this is really, really simple biochemical stuff. And this is a place to start.
It's so sad that it's the simplest thing, and yet it is 10 times more complicated or 100 times more complicated. It's not even complicated, but rich and diverse and rich in information that can give you insight into multiple aspects of your biochemistry / biology / health. And no, let's wait until we get sick and then have to go to the doctor and get them to drop one too.
Let's keep adding one level on top of it. When we fix these things, we create biochemical reserve. We're seeing improved muscularity. Like even myself, like I know some people that are on the plasmalogens, like I'm physically stronger than I was in my 20s now, and I don't know why. I do push-ups and things like that. So we know we're doing things in the right direction, and all the tools that we can garner from all the brains of the world are welcome. And so we'll add our particular contribution to this path, and that's kind of what we'll do.
That's exciting. Well, Dan, I really appreciate you taking the time to go over this report for me, and hopefully the audience will appreciate it as well too. And Kevin, also, really appreciate your continued support and everything that you're doing. It's just fantastic, and it's great to be, connected with folks like you guys.
That's awesome. We're all doing it together. Yeah. Thanks very much, Dan. Thanks, Brent.
You guys have a great night.
All right, you too.
Cheers.
Take care. Cheers, Dan.